Girlfriend moved in, replaced my late wife's photos with art, claims I need to move on from my past marriage. When I was 24 years old, I married my wife. Our relationship went through its ups and downs, and we were actually considering divorce when I was about 29 and she was 31. But then everything changed. She was diagnosed with stomach cancer. That experience turned my entire world upside down. The divorce talk vanished, and our focus shifted to cherishing every remaining moment together. As her illness progressed, I found myself doing things for her I never thought I'd have the strength to do, changing her bedpan, cleaning her sheets, making sure she could stay in our home to pass away peacefully. As painful as that journey was, it completely transformed me. I came out on the other side a kinder, more patient man, with a much deeper understanding of what it truly means to care for someone. I still carry regrets and memories of the ways I fell short back then, but I know her illness, and her loss, forced me to grow up. The grief that followed her death was a blur. I was haunted by every cruel word and selfish moment from my past, but somehow, I made my way through it, even if I still think about her often. About 9 months ago, a woman I used to work with started helping out with my son for a few hours each week. She knew what had happened with my wife because she was there through all of it at work, and she just wanted to lend a hand. I think she planned to pursue me fairly soon after that, and honestly, I started developing feelings for her, too. Our relationship grew naturally, we eased into something comfortable and real. I've been so much kinder to her than I ever was capable of being with my wife, and, a few months after she started helping with my son, we decided we wanted to be more than just friends. From the very beginning, I was honest with her about my lingering love for my wife and made it clear that I would never remove my wife from my life, or from my son's. About a month ago, we took a big step. She moved into my house. This is the same house my late wife and I lived in together. My girlfriend has truly been wonderful to my son. She's patient with me, understanding, and, to be honest, she's the first woman I've slept with or felt attracted to since my wife died. As a single father, dating around isn't something I have the desire or energy for. She's the only woman who's interested me since everything changed. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until a few days ago. I came home and noticed the pictures of my wife were gone from the mantel. When I asked my girlfriend why she took them down, she told me she'd bought some new art she wanted to display, and that set off alarm bells for me. I told her I wasn't okay with her just removing memories like that. She got really upset and said I needed to move on, arguing that since I was planning to divorce my wife before her illness anyway, there wasn't much to hold on to. She told me it bothered her to move into a house where she couldn't decorate or make it her own. That's simply not true. I hadn't even gotten around to thinking about completely redecorating the place for her yet, that's all. I find myself totally confused here. I don't know if it's really inappropriate for me to keep photos of my late wife up now that I have a girlfriend. This is uncharted territory for me. I haven't lived with anyone else before, so I don't know the etiquette at all. It's not like I have a shrine to my wife, but there are photos in the living room, a few on the refrigerator, one from our wedding day in the dining room, and my son has them in his room. I did have a couple in my bedroom, but after thinking about it, I put them away in a drawer. I can see how that might be uncomfortable for my girlfriend. I don't want to use my son as an excuse for holding on to memories, but I genuinely believe he should have those pictures. My girlfriend sort of understands that, but she says we could just keep them in his room. But am I really out of line for insisting the pictures stay up? There will always be a part of me that loves my wife. I didn't say it so bluntly to my girlfriend, but it feels so silly to argue about this, and I can't imagine letting it become a battle. I don't want to be insensitive to her feelings, but it feels like she crossed a line by taking them down herself. Update 1. Last night everything fell apart in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I had asked my girlfriend countless times about what she'd done with my wife's pictures, and when she got back, she was immediately hostile, interrogating me about why I even had the pictures in the first place, and, out of nowhere, accusing me of masturbating to them. That accusation stunned me. It was honestly one of the wildest things anyone's ever said to me. She told me I was insensitive to her feelings, that I wasn't meeting her needs, that I treated her just as badly as I had my wife, and that she wanted the pictures gone because of her masturbation fears. That absolutely floored me. The truth is, no, I wasn't and would never masturbate to the pictures on the mantel. Yes, I do have some intimate photos of my wife tucked away in my safe, untouched for years, but the ones on display are nothing remotely sexual. I tried to find some middle ground. I said she could pick another wall in the house, just put the pictures back. I even offered to keep them locked away in my safe where she'd never see them. Not that I actually planned on doing it, just to see if she'd finally tell me where they were. I have always been brutally honest with her about my feelings for my wife. She's never leaving my life, not even in death. The vows I made were forever, and I told my girlfriend she'd have to accept that or leave. The conversation grew more heated. I suggested I'd get her a hotel room for the night. Honestly, I just needed time alone. She exploded at that and stormed off to her friend's house instead. She spent the whole night texting me, calling me awful things, just unloading everything she felt. After she left, I reached out to my wife's sister, someone so important to both me and my son. My relationship with her had always been platonic, a friendship that began in hostility when I was married. She was my wife's best friend. They shared everything, sometimes even the messy details about my marriage, but deepened after my wife died. She became one of my dearest friends, almost a stand-in sister to me. She's an incredible role model to my son. Though she looks a lot like my wife, something that I think plays into my now ex's jealousy, I've never seen her as anything more than family. Because my girlfriend had issues with her before, I distanced myself somewhat, curbing our dinners, our movie nights, just to avoid fights. But that night, I wanted comfort and honesty, so I invited her over again. We opened a bottle of wine, put on a movie, and spent hours reminiscing. We talked about who my wife would have become, how obsessed she'd be with today's cell phone cameras. She always loved photography. We speculated on what she would have thought of my girlfriend if things had turned out differently, or how she would parent our son now, with his interest in robotics. We even discussed giving him one of her old cameras. Eventually, the talk turned to my girlfriend. My wife's sister brought up some uncomfortable but valid points, how manipulative my girlfriend's tactics to move in had been, how hiding the photos should have always been a deal breaker, how trying to isolate me from my wife's family was emotional abuse. She pointed out so many dynamics I'd just been too close, or maybe too blinded, to see for myself. Around 5 in the morning, my girlfriend came home. My wife's sister had stayed in my son's room, where she always sleeps when she doesn't drive home, since we'd both been drinking. But my girlfriend completely lost it the second she saw the car out front. She came in screaming, calling my wife's sister a slut, swearing she knew I'd cheat the second she left. To me, it was so absurd. To sleep with her would be like sleeping with my own sister. At this point, I was already thinking about breaking things off anyway, so her accusations just rolled right off me. But then she demanded I choose right there between the two of them. I refused. I wasn't about to play her ultimatum game. I told her flat out, I'm not choosing my wife's sister, but I am choosing to kick my girlfriend out. She was done. She stormed out onto the patio, glued to her phone. My sister-in-law took my son somewhere safe. I followed my girlfriend outside, telling her I'd give her cash, pay for a moving truck, whatever it took. She just wasn't welcome in my house any longer. That sparked another meltdown, but I stuck to my decision. Here's what I've learned through all of this, something I think only people who've been widowed can truly understand. First, yes, I am actually ready to date again after all this time. 5 years have passed. I'm ready, and I believe my son is too, though next time I'll move at a snail's pace and never rush someone into my home. Maybe somewhere out there is a woman who understands my wife's irreplaceable role in my son's and my own lives. Second, my sister-in-law opened my eyes to the fact that I'm likely so prone to accepting more than I should from people, all because I still carry the trauma of losing someone so dear. I'm terrified of being abandoned or reliving that nightmare again. Third, I feel awful that my son had to go through this confusion and pain, but I'm ready to talk with him, to explain everything, and to apologize. He's a bright kid, and he deserves to understand that while it's hard to say goodbye to people, you must not let anyone abuse or take advantage of you, even if they act kind at first. No woman will ever try to replace his mother. That's simply not possible. And, because some people have asked, no, I didn't get the pictures back, and at this point I doubt I ever will. My sister-in-law has all of my wife's darkroom equipment, and I want to learn to use it, to process some of the old negatives I have. I also have access to the negatives from those pictures my now ex took down. Even if they aren't the originals, I can have them blown up, they'll be enough. Update 2. I didn't expect the house to feel so quiet with just me and my son again. The first morning after everything blew up, I made pancakes I knew he'd barely touch and put on the song his mother used to hum while she ground coffee. I kept waiting for the now ex to come crashing back in with another round, but she didn't. Instead, around noon, she texted that she'd be by with 2 friends to grab her things and anything she'd bought for the house. I told her I'd be outside, that a neighbor would be there, too, and that she was to take her belongings and nothing else. She arrived like a weather system, eyes puffy, jaw set, 2 people behind her who didn't make eye contact. I had her stuff boxed by the door. I'd taken pictures of every room that morning because I've learned to cover myself when people call you names you've never deserved. She did a slow loop, picking things up like she was shopping, and twice tried to sweep something that wasn't hers into a tote and pretend it had been my son's Polaroid camera. A teacup my wife used the night before her last chemo round. I kept my voice low and said no. Eventually she stopped performing for her friends and asked for cash again. I offered the same help I'd already promised, movers, a storage unit, even paid through the end of the week. She said she didn't want my blood money and then asked, with a kind of flat brightness that scared me, if I was ready to admit where I'd hidden the parn wall. I told her again to leave. When she was finally out of the driveway, I called the non-emergency line and filed a report for the missing photos. The officer was kind and realistic. Given that she'd been living there, it might get tagged as a civil matter unless I could prove where the pictures had been and that she'd taken them. I sent him the timestamped photos I'd just taken of the bare mantle, the nails still in the wall, the dust outlines. He added a note to the report and suggested I save any messages. It was the blandest bit of bureaucracy, but it made me feel less like I was shouting into a void. That night, my son and I went into the garage to pull down his robotics kit, which lives on a shelf above a line of Rubbermaids. He clambered up the stepladder, and the second he shoved back a tote marked winter, a soft thud sounded behind the drywall. I thought it was a mouse at first. He called for me, voice tight, and we both leaned toward the little half door that opens into the crawl space. He lifted it and shone his flashlight inside. There they were, 21 frames swaddled in a mess of old towels and black trash bags, shoved as far back as 2 hands could reach. I swear I felt my knees go weak. We dragged them out one by one, our fingers black with dust and insulation fluff. The wedding photo was still in the heavy wooden frame my wife had picked at a thrift store, its glass cracked clean through the middle but otherwise intact. The picture of her with our son asleep on her chest, hair falling across her face like a curtain, had little dings at the corners where someone had jammed it and pried it and didn't care. My son ran his palm over one and then pulled his hand back like it had burned him. We sat right there on the cold garage floor and unwrapped each one. Taped to the back of the wedding frame was a paper grocery bag, one of those old brown ones with the blue print, and under it, an envelope with my name in my wife's handwriting. The date in the corner was a month before she went on hospice. I couldn't bring myself to open it in a garage that smelled like motor oil and dust, so we carried everything inside, and I put the envelope on the kitchen table. I put water on for tea because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My wife's sister came over within the hour. She walked in, saw the mound of frames and the envelope, and just sank onto a chair like someone had cut her strings. She always tucked things behind frames, she said, almost laughing, remembering. We must have peeled the backs off a dozen more just to check. A grocery list, 2 pressed ginkgo leaves, a lab receipt from a roll of film she'd never picked up. No more letters. The one with my name on it felt heavier and heavier, like it was soaking up the whole room. I opened it after my son went to bed. It was 3 pages, written fast, my wife's lines slanting more than usual, mistakes left in with a little arrow to the side instead of crossed out because she hated seeing her words buried. She wrote about the wall, about wanting our son to grow up with her face where he could see it, not in a box. She told me love wasn't a chair with only one seat, and that if I ever tried to pretend she hadn't existed to make someone else feel comfortable, she'd haunt me by knocking my spices off the counter at 3 a.m. She told me not to confuse grief with penance forever. And she asked me to make sure that any woman who came into our lives, if one ever did, knew that she, too, would be on the wall one day because the point wasn't to keep a museum, it was to keep a home. At the bottom, after her name, there was a P.S. I could hear in her voice even on the page. Please don't let anyone put me in the crawl space. That's where spiders live. I don't think I've cried like that in years. My sister-in-law sat with me and didn't try to fix it. We lined the frames on the mantel and along the floor under it, measuring the old holes in the wall with painter's tape. The glass replacement can wait. The empty rectangles where the pictures had been felt like they were filling up with breath again. The next day, we finally did what I'd been saying for months, set up the darkroom. We found her enlarger in my sister-in-law's basement, the lamp dusty but intact. The red safe light buzzed faintly when it warmed up, like it remembered the hum of a soundtrack you can't place. I took my son to the camera shop to buy fresh chemistry. The clerk behind the counter was new to me but not to our family. He pulled an old ledger and asked if we were M's parents because there was an envelope left there with our last name on it. Inside were negatives from a roll my wife shot the spring before everything started. A picnic. My son covered in watermelon, my wife catching a dandelion seed in her mouth. I don't believe in signs, not like that, but I will tell you that feeling the slick cool of those negatives in my hands made me think maybe some things find a way through no matter how much nonsense you stack in front of them. We made prints, my son and I, with his aunt teaching him to rock the trays gently and not breathe too close to the developer. He watched the images appear out of nothing like ghosts deciding to be generous. He laughed, actually laughed, and said his mother looked like a superhero because she'd lifted him up with one hand in one of the shots. We strung the photos with clothespins across a makeshift line and left the kitchen door open for the breeze to carry out the smell. I put one of those new prints in a frame right away, next to 2 of the ones we'd rescued. I'm not skilled yet, I blew the contrast on half the batch, but it didn't matter. The house looked like itself again. There were still messes to clean up. My ex sent a blast of text the following evening, how I was a monster, how she couldn't believe I'd called the cops, how her friend had said the sister-in-law was sleeping over again. I told her in one message to stop contacting me and that any retrieval of the rest of her items would go through a third party. I blocked her after that. 2 days later, her mother called me, unexpected, soft-voiced, and said she was sorry for her daughter's behavior, that this wasn't the first time jealousy had made her do ugly things. I thanked her and made no promises and hung up. I changed the codes on the garage and the front door and scheduled a consult with a lawyer just to make sure my paperwork was right. I don't want to fight with anyone anymore, but I'll protect my kid and our home. Last night, my son asked if he could bring his mother's old camera to the robotics club picnic and try to take a picture of the robot he'd built clearing a little ramp. He wanted to put that on the wall, too, in between everything else. We loaded a roll, and he took 3 shots, and the sun caught the dust motes in our living room in a way that made me think of all the dinners we'd had around that table, the times we'd argued and made up and put the kettle on. I think this is what my wife meant, a wall that keeps growing, a life that keeps including. Update 3. 2 mornings after we strung the new prints in the kitchen, my phone lit up at 4:12 a.m. with a video from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it because my stomach already knew what it might be. It was one of my ex's friends, the taller one who had kept her eyes on the floor the day they came to get her things. She didn't say hello, didn't add a caption, just sent a 38-second clip and then another that followed right after. In the first, the camera is tilted because it's in her pocket, but you can see my mantle in the corner of the frame and hear my ex laughing, all breath, no humor. Porn wall, my ass, she says to someone I can't see, and then there's this hollow scritch as nails come out of wood and glass kisses tile. The second clip is in the garage. You watch bare arms and a ponytail disappear into the crawl space and reappear, and then that black trash bag crumples like a body laid down. There's a third video I didn't expect, the friend whispering into the same camera in her car later, eyes rimmed red, that she was sorry, that she didn't sign up to be part of this, that if I needed to show someone, I could. I forwarded it to the officer from the report and then sat at the table with the kettle hissing to drown out the noise of my pulse. He called within the hour. You could hear him doing that cop voice measured thing, but underneath it he sounded human. He said the videos were enough. He said if I wanted to pursue charges I could, and that at the very least he'd be calling her with a criminal mischief warning on file, which meant if anything else happened at my address with her name attached to it, the next step wouldn't be a conversation. I told him I didn't know yet what I wanted to do. He told me to take my time and document anything that came. He didn't know he was echoing the letter on my table, but he did. By the end of the day, a small box appeared on my porch. Inside was the Polaroid of my wife blowing cheeks at our son to make him laugh, a novelty magnet from a roadside stand with the name of a town we once drove through, on accident, and a note in my ex's handwriting that said, "Found these." Nothing else. I carried the box in like it might bite. We took it to the darkroom the way people carry sleeping children, careful, purposeful, a little in awe of the weight. The enlarger hummed. My son rocked trays like he'd been born doing it. My wife's sister showed him how to rinse longer when the fixer smelled sharper than usual. He asked if we could make one big print of the watermelon photo. We did. The white's too white, the edges burnt a little where I got cocky with my hands, and it was perfect anyway. That night, getting the Nikon ready for the picnic, I unzipped the old canvas bag and heard the tiniest rattle. I tipped it and a metal cassette rolled into my palm. The film leader stuck out like a tongue. My wife had always rewound to just before the leader disappeared so she could pull it out with her fingers at home. I don't know why I remember that, but it made the breath catch in me because it meant the last person to touch this roll was her. We shut off the lights and did the dance in the dark, fingertips on the spiral, my son narrating like the sports commentators he loves even though he couldn't see a thing. The negatives came out clean. I clipped them and held them up to the red light. I thought they would be the picnic again, but they weren't. They were our kitchen on a winter morning, my hand in the frame pouring coffee, the steam turning the light visible. They were my wife's mirror, where you could see me in the doorway with my head down and she's in front, grinning, camera covering half her face, hair wild. They were a hospital room without the hospital, because she shot at an angle where the only clues are the shape of a chair back and a vase that shouldn't be there. There is one that made me sit down, me asleep in the blue chair, mouth open in a way I never let anyone see, her hand on my forearm in the bottom corner where she must have reached. I have no memory of her taking it. It knocked the air out of me and filled me back up, both. We made contact sheets and then wet the paper and printed a few, still clumsy but learning. The mirror one is on the wall now, tucked near the doorway where I catch it at odd times and feel not watched but kept company. The one of me sleeping I put up in my bedroom for a minute and then moved to the hall, felt guilty, moved it back, then finally gave it a home on the shelf across from my son's room, where he paused that first morning and said, "You look like a walrus," and grinned for real at me, and I let it be. In between all of that, life did that thing where it insists on itself. My son's robotics club had its picnic. He took the old camera and made me carry cold pizza boxes and insist on sunscreen. He framed the robot with his friends around it like it was a spaceship launch. He missed focus on two and nailed it once, and when the tray rocked in the dim red and the robot came up with the boys behind it mid-shout, he whispered, yes, like magic had agreed to keep its end of the bargain. That print is up, too, to the right of the wedding photo, a little crooked because he hung it without waiting for me, and I left it exactly how he placed it. We had a hanging night, finally, not the somber, museum still thing I thought it might be, but pizza and too many paper towels for greasy hands and my wife's parents telling the story about the frame again and how she had argued for the ugly gold one until the lady at the thrift store knocked $5 off the price and my wife carried it under her arm like it was as delicate as a bird. We put Quake putty under each corner the way a stranger on the internet once told me to keep frames from shifting in houses that shake. My father-in-law measured holes and stepped back and squinted and went, there, in a voice that meant a lot more than there. The camera shop clerk told us about a monthly print night at the community center. People bring whatever they made that month and clip it to a line and you can trade or just look. We went. There were kids my son's age and old men with ink-stained fingers and a woman who runs a wedding photography business and uses film just for herself so she doesn't forget why she started. My wife's sister walked a soft circle around my son as he showed his robot photo to a gray-haired guy who taught him a word, bouquet, that he tried out loud 3 times and decided was ridiculous and then loved anyway. I left with a borrowed book on dodging and burning and a donated half box of paper from the woman with the wedding business who said paper is cheaper to give away than to let go stale. The ex didn't show up again. There were no more midnight storms at the door. The officer called once to say he'd reached her and documented his warning. Her mother sent one last awkward text about wishing her daughter could see herself, which told me everything and nothing. I kept everything from that whole mess in a folder labeled with the case number and put it in the back of my filing cabinet. When my hands itched to handle it, I pick up my wife's camera instead. A week after the picnic, my son asked if we could take a picture together for the wall because we're on the wall, too, Dad. We stacked cookbooks, screwed the Nikon on the tripod head that didn't quite fit but did if you held your breath, and set the self-timer. We stood in front of the mantel, him tucking himself into my side like he did when he was small, both of us trying to decide if we should smile and then doing it at the same time by accident. The shutter clicked. We made two more, one where I blinked and one where he stuck his tongue out without thinking about it. In the dark, the image came like a slow confession, and when it was dry, I put it up not in a humble corner but right in the mix, to the left of the thrift store frame, like we belonged, which we do. I swear I could feel her looking and not minding at all. On Sunday morning, my wife's sister and I took my son to the flea market because he wanted a tin to keep his negatives in. At a table sagging with picture frames, I found glass that fit exactly the cracked pane in our wedding photo. The man selling it waved off my money when I told him why. We brought it home, and I replaced the glass and smoothed the backing like a bedsheet. When I turned the frame over, I half expected another secret, a leaf or a list or a note. There wasn't one this time. It was just my wife, and me, and a day when we didn't know what was coming, both of us standing in the light. I hung it back up and stood there longer than made sense. The kettle hissed. The house held still in that way houses do when they're full. And then my son came barreling in to tell me he'd figured out how to program his robot to follow a line without veering, and the moment broke like a wave and rolled straight into the next one. Update 4. Two things happened almost on top of each other that felt like they were from different movies spliced together badly: the certified letter and the light bulb that wouldn't turn off. The letter came mid-afternoon, pale blue strip on top, the kind that needs your signature and your nerves. It was from a clerk of court, small claims, a hearing date 2 weeks out. My ex was suing for property and rent owed, a laundry list of things she said she'd bought for the house and funds she claimed she was entitled to because she'd managed the household for a month. I put the letter on the counter, and the kettle hissed like it knew it had a cameo. I didn't want to be back in any kind of courtroom, but I also didn't want that folder of police report printouts sitting like ballast for nothing. I called the lawyer I'd consulted and we set up a plan that was really just a polite way of saying show up with your facts and don't take the bait. The officer added his note about the videos. My son listened to me practice out loud in the living room, his face tilted like a sparrow's. You don't have to be nervous, he said finally, wise in that way kids are when they aren't overthinking. You're telling the truth. That's easier. He went back to soldering a wire to a tiny board he was dead sure he could teach to tell the enlarger when to switch off. The light bulb that wouldn't turn off wasn't a metaphor, though it felt like it tried to be. The red safe light in the darkroom had been faintly buzzing since we hung it, the same way a fridge hums a neighborhood into feeling lived in. That night it decided to get brighter on its own. I went down to check on a hunch before bed and found the room lit like a stop sign. I twisted the cord, popped the housing, looked at the transformer and that mocking little fuse that always looks innocent. My son came in, hair a mess, careful with his steps even in the glow, and handed me the board he'd been working on. It's a timer, he said, too casual. I coded it so the light's on for exactly however many seconds you want and then poof. He had wrapped it in the old metal lid from a coffee can because he'd read something about grounding and because my wife used to keep buttons in coffee cans and that's what we had. It wasn't pretty, which made me love it more. I mounted it on a 2x4 because that's what we had, too, and we clipped it between the outlet and the safe light. His thumb hovered, he looked up, I nodded, and he clicked it on, counted soft under his breath, and at 30, the red slipped off like it had been told a goodnight story. He didn't cheer. He just nodded like an engineer in a movie and left the room dignified until he reached the hall, where he did a quiet little hop that made his aunt laugh out loud from the kitchen. Court was fluorescent and tired and harder than I wanted to admit. We walked through the metal detector, my sister-in-law with us because she refuses to let me do the hard things alone now that I've remembered I shouldn't. My ex sat across the room on a plastic chair with a trio of papers spread like tarot cards and a look she'd practiced in a mirror, wounded, performative, like the air itself had wronged her. The friend who had sent me the videos was there, too, on the end of a bench, shoulders rounded, a grocery store bouquet of mums in her lap for no good reason I could make up. The judge was the kind of woman who you could see had once been a teacher people didn't talk back to. She listened. She asked both of us the same questions. My ex said parn wall twice and the judge didn't flinch, just said photos of the plaintiff's late wife in that steady voice, each time. I put the printouts on the stand, the videos queued on my phone, the way the lawyer told me to do like I was auditioning for a role I didn't want. The friend walked up when they called her, hands shaking so hard the mums shivered, and she said in a small voice that she hadn't signed up to be part of stealing, that she'd filmed because she knew it was wrong, that she was sorry. My ex's jaw went to stone. The judge looked at the forms, looked at me, looked at the videos, and divided the list into 3 neat piles like she was slicing a cake. Things my ex could take that were obviously hers, things that were obviously mine, things she didn't get to take or be reimbursed for because throwing them into a crawl space cancels your claim. She ordered restitution for the frames broken, a number smaller than the ache but fair because glass is cheap and your life is not. She added a note that either party could file for a protection order if contact continued, and she did it in a tone that told me she meant if, not when. It wasn't TV. No gavels, no speeches. But it felt like oxygen showed up again on schedule. Outside, the mum's woman, that friend, came over like she was bracing for me to yell. I didn't. I told her thank you like please was attached to it because it was. She cried so hard the pedals shook and then rummaged in her bag and handed me a Ziploc with 4 negatives, curled and smelling like the bottom of a drawer. These were in her car, she said. I didn't want to. I just wanted to put them where they belong. I didn't open the bag in the parking lot. My wife's sister took it like it was breakable, which in its way it was. You'll laugh because I did. That night at 3:01 a.m., the cumin fell off the spice rack. No earthquake. No cat. Just a rattle and a soft papery thud I felt miles down. I lay there in the dark, stupid soft with tears for a minute because she had always threatened me with that in the letter and then delivered with the kind of petty flourish that makes a marriage bearable. I got up, picked up the jar, put it on the counter, and whispered, fine, into the empty kitchen like an idiot, like a husband. The negatives in the bag were odd sizes. 2 35mm like we've been living in lately, and 2 strips of 120 from her old Yashica I'd forgotten she loved because we hadn't unearthed it yet. One frame on the medium format was blank, overexposed or never shot. The other was her hand, blur, a table, a ring of light that could have been anything. We made a contact sheet in the morning. My son peered over my shoulder and kept saying whoa like he was on a gentle roller coaster. The clearest frame was the diner down the road from the thrift store, sun slamming in at that impossible angle that makes the vinyl look like a swimming pool and everyone squint. There was a woman at the counter caught mid-eye roll and a plate of pancakes glistening in a way that made my son ask why syrup photographs like a lake. There was a note in the rebate envelope the negatives lived in, written in my wife's tiny print, the blue counter. Ask D. Ask who? My sister-in-law's eyebrows went up, a memory opening. D, she said, snapping her fingers. Short for Deirdre. She used to work mornings, hair like a helmet. We went to the diner at 11 like pilgrims. If you haven't tried to ask a stranger about a ghost, I don't recommend it as a hobby, but sometimes the world meets you in the middle if you show up, willing to be awkward. We sat at the counter. The woman behind it was not helmet hair, she was late 20s, sharp eyeliner, a tattoo my mother-in-law would have frowned at. I ordered coffee. My son ordered chocolate milk like he was sneaking a drink in a speakeasy. My sister-in-law pulled the contact sheet out of a newspaper and put her finger on the counter in the picture. We're looking for D, she said. The woman blinked and yelled into the back, Ma? A different woman came through the swinging door, and the hair wasn't a helmet anymore, it was a braid, and it went white in a way that made me think of smoke. She looked at the photo, then up at us, then back down, and I watched the decade roll across her face. She always said I'd end up in one of her pictures, she said, already laughing. I told her if I knew I'd at least fix my lipstick. She wiped at her mouth in a reflex that made us all smile. Dee had a box under the counter with things nobody claimed and things she couldn't bear to throw away, lost buttons, a VHS tape with March Parade and Sharpie, 3 keychains that looked like souvenirs from gas stations. She rummaged and pulled out a napkin in a plastic bag with our last name on it and a phone number that didn't belong to me. She called once to ask when the light was best, Dee said. That was the kind of woman she was. She came with a little boy and you, I think, but you were outside on the phone. She took pictures of my rings and somebody's eggs and the way the coffee steamed when the trucker on the end poured it from too high because he thought it made him look like a cowboy. We laughed about that for a week. She pressed the napkin into my hand like a talisman. The number was the camera shop. I know how coincidence works, and I don't. We took the napkin to the shop like it was a map, and the clerk with the careful hands ducked down and came up with a ring binder he hadn't shown us before. Inside, a sticky note on a clear sleeve with my wife's name and hold for pickup, call twice and a date so close to hospice my lungs pinched. 2 prints lived in there, test strips, really, one too dark, one perfect in that way imperfection is when it hits the right wrong. The blue counter gleamed like a promise. We asked what we owed, and he looked offended and looked moved and waved us off and then asked shyly if we'd bring them to print night because he'd like to see them up and not in a sleeve. We promised like teenagers. On the way out, my son said without preamble that we should make our own timer for the enlarger with a bigger screen and a knob because the button is too boring. He was already making a list in his head. At home, he cannibalized an old alarm clock that never learned daylight saving, and we stole the knob off the broken blender my wife had once put a hand to and called vintage so I wouldn't toss it. He turned my workbench into a nest of wires and domestic archaeology. By nightfall, we had a dial that made the light blink out with a satisfying clunk that had the gravitational pull of old technology. The prints tightened up because we could repeat ourselves, and there is a relief in that I hadn't noticed, the comfort of knowing if you touch a thing the same way, it will behave. 2 days before the hearing for small claims, the director of the community center emailed me. He'd seen our names on the print night list and asked if we'd like to hang a small show in the hallway for a month. It can be anything, he wrote. A family album for strangers, or something about time, or about walls. We hung 24, her diner, her mirror, her hand, our robot, our mantle in a rectangle of someone else's fluorescent, clipped to lines like laundry. I worried it would feel like making a circus out of intimacy, but it didn't. People stopped and went quiet and tilted their heads and then smiled, the way you do when you're looking right past a picture to your own kitchen table. My wife's parents came and stood in front of the thrift store frame image and told the story about the $5. Again, because it bears telling. My son stood under the robot photo like a docent in a museum and explained f-stops to anyone foolish enough to linger. A woman in a yellow cardigan touched my arm and said, "It looks like home," and I had to pretend to fuss with a clip so my face would be turned. The day of small claims, the judge denied my ex's request for rent owed flatly and cleanly and ordered her to pay half what the frames cost and to return a box of books she'd taken by mistake. My ex tried to talk over the end, which the judge shut down like she'd closed a window on a storm. I didn't file for anything that day. I held it in my pocket like a coin, the ability to do it, and walked out with my shoulders somewhere near where they were supposed to be. My ex's mother called that night and said she hoped the warning would stick this time because it hadn't in the past in other ways with other people, and then she apologized again for something that wasn't hers to apologize for, and I told her I hoped her daughter got well, because that was true and also the only thing that had anything like mercy in it. After, life did that creeping forward thing again. The cumin stayed on the counter like a dare. My son's timer worked until it didn't, and then we built it better because that's how you build things. The darkroom became more like a room and less like a shrine and more like both at once. We found the Yashica in a box under a sweatshirt I hadn't had the heart to wear. It still had film in it. We haven't processed it yet because I like knowing a future thing is waiting. We took a print wrapped in butcher paper, and she put it up by the time clock with a pushpin through the top that made me flinch until I saw how much she loved it there, daily and unprecious and exactly where it belonged. A week after the hallway show went up, the community center had an opening for a different exhibit in the main room. Landscapes and a high school kid's moody self-portraits and a man with a series of clouds that all looked like the same cloud in different moods. People spilled into the hallway and into our line of pictures like it had been designed that way. I stood with my back against the cinder block and watched as a pair of teenagers in matching hoodies pointed at the diner print and then pulled out their phones to take pictures of our picture, which used to rankle me and now makes me feel like maybe images are supposed to be contagious. My son tugged my sleeve and said, "She would like this," and my chest went wide and hurt because she would. On our way out, a small boy dragged his mother over to the robot photo and said, "I could build one," and she said, "I know you could," like she meant it, and it is a selfish, generous thing to admit this, but I wanted that documented in my son's brain as the proof of why you hang pictures where someone else can see them. We came home late to a house that smelled like Fixer no matter how well we vent, and the cumin was still on the counter. I put it back on the rack with a little thump. I didn't say anything out loud. I didn't need to. The wall glowed in that way glossy paper does under lamplight. I turned off one switch, then another, and the red took its bow on schedule, and we went to sleep with our faces caught in the usual way on our own mantle, held lightly, not haunted so much as kept.